We need to be taking action so we stay sane. This is basic psychological need. And so as parents, we can be helping our kids learn the routes that we can be speaking up.
Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone.
Welcome to another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. So grateful to have you listening and here with us today. Today's conversation is a really unique one. We talk about parenting, but we're also on the edges of other things that matter to us as parents that aren't just parenting. And I think it's a really important conversation. So if you are a parent, an educator, a person who has been watching, listening, learning, reading about what has been going on in the world as a whole, in the United States specifically, and in politics specifically, and are feeling stressed, distressed, alarmed, anxious. There's so many different words I could put there about what you're seeing, listening to, learning, reading, etc. This is a really great episode for you. And, even if you don't follow politics at all, you're not alarmed by what's going on, I still think this is a really important episode because it's the experiences that we talk about in this episode, I think, are really universal. So I'm about to introduce you to a friend and a colleague, a woman that I have gotten to know through a course that we're both taking called Playing Big, run by an incredible woman named Tara Moore, who also has a book called Playing Big that is really all about helping women step into their power, their passions, and to play bigger in the world in all the different ways that we show up. And today's guest and I met through that course, practicing, doing some coaching with one another, and have just really enjoyed getting to know each other. And so was so thrilled when I invited her to be a part of the podcast after learning more about what she does in the world. So let me tell you more about today's guest. So Jeanne Wolz is a mom, an award-winning former educator, and now is an entrepreneur and a career alignment coach. She helps women and non-binary folks who feel uninspired by their work pivot towards careers that create real social and climate impact. After becoming a parent, and you'll hear this in our conversation with one another, but after becoming a parent, Jeanne experienced firsthand how motherhood can shift priorities and career passions, leading her to pivot unexpectedly from an otherwise thriving business toward work more directly tied to social and climate crises that she was drawn to act upon. Now, through her business called Sirens Rising, which I just love, she guides others feeling uninspired by their current work to find a sense of purpose in their career again through that same transition of realigning with impact that they care about. Whether it's advocating for change within their companies, starting with an impact-driven business, or finding new ways to weave social good into their personal lives, Jeanne empowers women and non-binary folks to move past fear and take action so they can feel alignment, purpose, and meaning, and so that we can all move towards a more just and sustainable planet. What an incredibly cool mission. Jeanne is such an incredibly cool person, and I can't wait for you to meet her. So without further ado, Jeanne Wolz. Jeanne, it is so good to have you on the Heartful Parent Podcast. Talk about this.
Yeah. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
I am too. I'm really excited. Told listeners a little bit about how you and I got to know each other, which I think is really fun. And obviously, I also read them your more formal bio. But I want to start kind of at the beginning because we're digging into some really timely salient stuff right now. And so I want to make sure that we start at the beginning and kind of lay the foundation here. So share with us a little bit, if you would, how you started doing what you're doing now, and which I know is not what you've always done. There was a transition in there, which I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this can relate to. So let's talk about that transition a little bit, what you did, what you're doing now.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll preface this story with kind of more of a 3,000 feet off the ground summary of that. I am just a very passionate person. I'm someone who needs to be doing work that really matters to me. And I like dive headfirst into what I do. And so I've also experienced multiple times in my career where I notice that passion ebbing or changing or shifting. And that can be a really, really scary thing for people that are passionate like me. And so I'll tell my story, and that's just kind of a preface of just what I've experienced and what I know so many people, other people experience. And I have a
Yeah.
lot of hindsight now, understanding why those kinds of things happen. So I started as a teacher right out of college. I was your classic, like working a million hours a week. I joined every single committee, trying to save the world, just myself. And I loved what I did, but I ran myself into the ground. And so after about 4 years, I decided to follow a dream of mine to move abroad with my husband. And I started a business supporting teachers. And that was great too. So I loved what I was doing. I was working remotely. I had time freedom. It was kind of the ultimate dream coming from the super rigid teacher schedule. And that was great for a while. And I felt really passionate about what I was doing again until I had a baby. And then the pandemic hit. Like it happened within a few months for me. And my whole world shifted.
Yeah.
And suddenly I found myself, well, actually, it didn't happen very suddenly. It was kind of gradual where I found myself avoiding my email inbox. I didn't want to schedule any meetings with people. I didn't want to think about growing my business. I actually felt physically nauseous when I thought about growing my business, which was so scary for me because I was such a passionate person. Passion is kind of my compass. And if I'm not passionate about what I'm doing, it's like, what am I doing and where do I go? And so looking back, I can understand now that what was happening for me was that my callings were shifting. I believe now that we have multiple callings in our life, and I take some of this from Tara Moore, some of this from my coach I started working with at that time. The callings pull us into the person that we want to become. And sometimes we embark on a calling because we need to get something from that journey. And then once we get it, it's time to shift. And so I did that. I started a business. I learned so much from that business. And then my world context shifted and I started feeling my pull shifting. So a couple things were happening during that time that were important to bringing me where I am now. One thing was becoming a mom. And for me, I'm a white, cis, hetero, able-bodied woman, middle-class woman in the US. That was the first time and the biggest time I had confronted systemic oppression on a personal level in my life, like
Yeah.
on a very big bodily, visceral way. For a lot of other communities, this is something they've been dealing with their whole lives. But for me, it was this first time where I was really processing this on a day-to-day basis. And so that
Yeah.
totally shifted where my bandwidth was going. So it made sense that my passion for teaching and all these other topics that had been my focus for so long, I didn't have as much bandwidth for that anymore. The other thing that was happening during that time is I was starting to dive into the climate crisis and learn a little bit more about that. I vividly remember sitting on the couch one day when my son was a year and a half. He was sleeping in the other room, and I was doing some light reading on capitalism and the climate crisis. And I just had this epiphany that, and really processed that how quickly we are headed towards this cliff climate-wise within our own lifetime, definitely within our kids' lifetimes, and that everyone around me, including myself, was too busy to do anything about it, to stop the train from going to the cliff, because we're so busy making a living, trying to survive, parenting, doing all these things that we have to do. And so I was imagining my son living in this world post cliff, and I just felt this huge call to do something about it.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to what I'm doing now. So what I do now is I help women and non-binary folks merge the impact they want to be making in the world with the way that they are making a living so that they don't have to divide what they're doing across like volunteering times and this and making a living and making money, and so they can combine it and merge it and synergize that energy. So for some people, that's a matter of changing the niche that they're working in if they're an entrepreneur. For other people, if they're working in the corporate world, I've also helped people learn how to speak up about climate issues at their work. So yeah, that's how I got here.
I mean, I love it. And even though the specifics of that journey are unique to you, right?
Yeah.
I think the overarching journey and theme resonate with so many of us, including me, who went through a major transition from being an attorney, to my work now with parents,
Yeah.
which is not a transition I ever would have predicted, ever would have thought was going to be me. And I never thought I would lose that passion for the thing that, I had worked so hard to do. I would actually think it'd be kind of fun if listeners who are hearing this email me with your own stories of transition and moving from one thing to the other once a baby arrived on scene, or for some other reason, even though that's not the focus of what we're talking about today. It's such a rich place for a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
Okay, so email me, everyone, send me your stories, and maybe we'll make another podcast episode about that. But I want to dive back into the work that you're actually doing now. And even bigger than that, I think there's bravery and courage and passion. I know that's a word you've been using in getting that calling and then following it. So,
Hmm.
what I first want to ask you, for those who are like, calling, what's a call? I mean, I think many of us have heard that, but
Hmm.
how do you, Jeanne, define what it means to have or to get a calling?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll probably, as I'm defining this, be drawing heavily on Tara Moore's work. And that's how you and I met.
Yeah.
Um, but I define calling as a pull or an urge to contribute to the world in some specific way. And it's
Okay.
not always a way that you feel really prepared to do. Sometimes it's something that feels a little bit wildly outside of your comfort zone. A lot of times it is, but it's some kind of call. And it can be big, it could be small. It could just be, I feel a calling to really reach out to this kid on my kid's soccer team and connect with her and support her in some way. Or it could be a calling to start a new business or, start a nonprofit. It could be any one of those things, but it's just this urge to do something to contribute in the world in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Okay. So we talked just a moment ago. I sort of called out that fact that I went through a transition where previous passion fell away, new passion settled in, and that passion has been guiding my work for the last 7 years now. Is that a pattern that you've noticed? I called out and asked for stories, but I guess I'm curious, like, do you think there are stories out there? Do you think we'll get them? Is that a pattern that you've seen? And maybe you can talk a little bit about that in which in the ways that you've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think, yes, I think right now is it's especially a relevant thing because like for my story, for example, my calling was shifting because my context, my world context was shifting for me. I was having a deeper understanding of the climate crisis, and I also was having a deeper understanding of my world. I had a different relationship with the world as a mom. My day to day was wildly different. And so that's what changed. And I think now, with the shifting world that we are in right now, I'm seeing a lot of people feeling this pull to do something about it. I think the challenge is right now, especially with just the flooding of news, is to work our way out of despair. Because once we're in despair, if you're familiar with polyvagal theory, I've really been into this,
Yeah.
thinking about this a lot. You've got three states of your nervous system. If you're not familiar with the theory, you have your ventral And then parasympathetic, I think there's a different word for that. And then there's dorsal, and dorsal is where you're in despair and you're immobilized. And I think right now with the flooding of the news, so many people are feeling immobilized and in despair. And so moving out of that, once we can get into this ventral, and that's kind of my work right now, is helping people move back into that ventral state so that they can move forward and hear these callings for doing something and feeling like they can do something.
Certainly, I think you're right. We're seeing this pattern with a lot of people right now, given the state of the world, and that, for many of us, it feels like the world is on fire, not from a climate. I don't even mean from a climate perspective, although that's true too, but from a established systems and norms are being dismantled, right? And that is creating a lot of stress for people. I think what I was curious is if you've noticed that callings settling in any sort of a pattern around parenthood and the
Mhm.
arrival of parenthood.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I don't have any like scientific data on this other than anecdotes, but I just started noticing once when I started doing this work, like client after client were either about to start having kids, trying to have kids, they just had a baby, they were about to have a baby. And I have a lot of colleagues that started getting into this work around the same time for them too. And I think it's about this, like when you are going through this big context shift in your life, your priority shift. It can be having a baby, but it can also be something else major in your life. Your priority shift and the way that you view the world shifts. And that can cause us to need to step into new callings or
Yeah.
give us some information about the person that we need to become to fulfill this phase in our life.
Yeah. I think what's so impressive to me about you is that your son is 5, right? And
Mhm.
you had that calling shortly after he arrived on scene, and you listened to the calling.
Mm.
Contrast that with me. It took me 8 years of getting a calling, or let's say 7, because that first year after my older daughter was born was, listeners have probably heard me describe like it was the hardest year ever.
Yeah.
And then this calling started to set in, and I didn't want to listen to it because, frankly, it was inconvenient to my narrative of who
Mm.
I was and who I thought I was going to be. And I know that that is a common experience for people, right? Where we have developed stories and narratives in our own minds about who we are as women and men, non-parents. That changes when we become parents, or we have a professional narrative, and then we get a calling. So, so that others don't have to wait 8 years before they actually decide to listen to it. Can you share with us a little bit about how someone can tap into that feeling that of a calling, that they can start to step into that passion, or, I think we could put a number of different words on that, because as you touched on, like we are in a period of lots of callings happening for people, or even if the calling isn't really clear, a lot of desire to step into action, but not knowing how to do that.
Yeah.
I'd love to explore that space a little bit with you. What do we do to step into action or to respond to a calling that we've received?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And I will say, like what you were talking about with feeling like callings all around us. My work, I call my business is called Sirens Rising, which is it's supposed to be meaning a lot of different things, like sirens rising around the world, sirens rising within us, callings rising within us to follow. And so to answer your question about how do we begin? I think the first thing is to let yourself feel the calling. I view my work sometimes, I'm a very visual person, so I view my work sometimes as like I'm in a greenhouse and I'm nurturing little baby plant ideas for folks. And ideas and callings are so similar to plants in that they need some TLC before they can go out to the world. And the first like steps of giving plants, little baby plant ideas, TLC, is to let them breathe, let them live. So this can look like doing an imagination exercise where you're just imagining, okay, if I followed this, what would be the ideal? Like, what would it look like? Like, if we took the example of just this, helping this kid on your kid's soccer team, like what would it look like if you supported this kid? Or if a bigger one, like what would it look like if I started this nonprofit? What would be the ideal? What would my day-to-day look like? What would the impact be? So letting yourself feel that, because so often what happens is people say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to start a nonprofit," but really that one is not going to work, and they start going down all these like inner critic and fear paths. So let yourself feel that. Second step is to feel the fear. Because the fear is 100% part of the whole calling process. My coach that I worked with a few years ago would tell me, like, if you're feeling a lot of fear around this, that's probably a sign that we're onto something. This is a good direction for you to go into. I
Yeah.
don't know if Tara Moore said this, or I don't know, this is something she would say, but I view callings as a curriculum. She might have said that, not the
Oh, I
destination.
love that.
Yeah. We think of calling like, okay, I'm called to make this nonprofit. So in order for me to do that, I have to first make sure that I have all this training and X, Y, and Z and do all this homework and make sure that I am an executive director first. When really like your calling to start that nonprofit is your curriculum, and all those fears you have to work through to get there is your curriculum for becoming the person that you need to be and want to be.
Which I think is such an important point to make, that idea that just because we get a calling, we think we should then be ready, that we are the person for that, right? And then when we go, well, we're not, then we're like, well, it's not a real calling. When the reality is, as you've been saying, like the the calling is actually inviting us to step into the process of becoming the person
Yes.
that can do whatever it is that feels it needs to be done.
Yes, I love the way you put that. It's an invitation to become the person. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, really common fears I hear around this are things like, I'm not an expert on this. How do I know my work is even going to matter? I'm not ready for this. How could I work this into what I'm already doing with my work? How is it all going to fit together? A lot of questions and a lot of fears about not being enough, and just feeling those and labeling for them for what they are. They're either an inner critic voice or they're a fear, and that's what they are. They're part of the process. They are a sign that you are onto something, and they are also part of the curriculum. So just expect it. And I think the one thing that kills me when I hear people with wonderful, beautiful ideas to bring into the world, what kills me is when they start believing those fears, like because they have the fear, that means that they shouldn't do it. And I just want to shake them and say, no, that's the reason you should do it. This is the
Yes.
whole point. This is the whole point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tara talks about that. She differentiates fear,
Yeah.
and I don't want to mispronounce any words or get this wrong, but she brings in the Jewish tradition that there's pakad,
Yeah.
right? Or pahad, which is sort of fear in the way that we think about it normally.
Yeah.
And then there's yara, which is this, I almost, the way I've separated it out in my head is it feels like fear, but what's actually underneath the surface is excitement and possibility.
Right. This sense of being a part of something bigger. And yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when that yara shows up, there's something to explore there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one thing for us to sit here from that place of philosophizing and say, well, when you're feeling that fear, just feel the fear,
Mhm.
recognize the fear and then do it anyway,
Yeah.
which, yes, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. So talk to me a little bit about like how you guide people and how you guided yourself
Mm.
from that second step onto what's next, like the feeling of the fear. And now what? Now what?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I love the way that Tara puts, I've heard her say before, like sometimes you don't even need to deal with the fear, for example, if that's showing up. Sometimes you just expect it, you put on a raincoat and you move on. And so putting on the raincoat, there's a lot of different techniques for just shifting into a different energy so you can move from a place outside of fear. One is just tapping into, for me, And I use this all, actually, I just used this last week. I was in a coaching exchange and somebody helped me do this, is tapping into the energy that inspired you to follow this calling. For example, last week I mean, because this is an ongoing process, right? Like you don't just get cured of fear and then you're good to go forever and always. Like new things will just keep popping up for you. And so I was feeling that last week, and my coaching partner helped me tap back into, for me, it was just this like nurturing energy. And I really just kind of basked in that energy of nurturing, like imagining myself in a greenhouse and thinking about that instead of thinking like, oh, I need to nurture my email list. I need to do all these different things to like check all the boxes in my business. I'm really just thinking, oh, my work in this world is nurturing these baby ideas, and this is my way of like watering the plants and adding fertilizer and doing these things. So really channeling it into back to your roots of what inspired you to do the work to begin with and reframing it. Another way is a really simple way is just if you're feeling this fear really amping up for you in a specific moment, is just channeling kind of a positive, generous type emotion. Tara talks about this a lot. So, like, for example, love or service. So, just taking a second, closing your eyes, and asking yourself, what does love feel like? What does this energy feel like? What color is it? What's the texture of it? And the whole purpose of that is for you to really be tapping into that understanding and that concept in your head. And so there isn't room for the fear. Like when you're thinking of love and when you're channeling love, there's just no room for fear in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And so
Mm-hmm.
from that place of, not to say the fear goes away, it just disappears forever, but it's not what your heart and your mind are really focusing on in that moment. And so from that place of love, what would be the next steps for you in
Yeah.
this calling? And a lot of times it's so simple when you're from that place. It goes from like, well, I need to start this whole nonprofit to I just need to call somebody and talk to them about what their experience was in starting their nonprofit. Or I just need to look into what people would be interested in this kind of work or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question that was actually coming into my mind just a few moments ago before you shared some specific examples was how do we sort of move from that place of love that like the word I love to use is because it's the name of my business is the word heartful, right? That really heartful space. How do we move from that, into action when like things like overwhelm and, not just fear, but like overwhelm and I don't have time and I don't, right? All these other things come in, some of them being our inner critic and some of them being real barriers, time,
Yeah,
perhaps money,
yeah.
support. How do we move through that overwhelm and those
Mhm.
barriers into the next step?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it really goes back to what I was just talking about, where it's about tapping into a different frequency, but that's easier said than done. I think what the practice is in planning out time for yourself to do that, planning out a space for yourself to do that. So instead of it being like, okay, on Friday, I'm going to pound out whatever it is that I need to do. I don't even know what I need to do next. I'm overwhelmed and I'm just going to put it off. Instead of that, it's okay, on Friday, I'm going to give myself some space to revisit why I want to do this and tap into this wiser part of me. There's the inner mentor visualization Tara Moore does, which helps you envision yourself 20 years into the future. And that is a way of tapping into like a simpler, wiser
Yeah.
self. But really, what it's about, it's beyond just like beyond coming up with the perfect like 10-year plan for whatever it is that you want to do. It's really about what is just the next best thing. Adrienne Marie Brown talks about what's the actual pace of this work and what is the actual next best step.
Mm,
And a lot of times when we can tap into those wiser parts of ourselves, that can become really clear.
yeah. That inner mentor visualization is really powerful. It's one that I do with my clients. But I love that, that may not be accessible to everyone. And so this idea of just tapping into what is the next best thing, which can feel so counterintuitive in our westernized US culture where it's all about going big and being
Hmm.
productive and doing all the things
Yeah.
and recognizing maybe we don't have to actually do that. We can start smaller.
Yeah, totally. And really like to backtrack a little bit too, if what ultimately you're dreaming of, sometimes we can scare ourselves off by making our ideas and our vision like so big. It's almost a tactic of hiding because, well, I can't make that huge company, so I this is just an impossible dream. When
Yeah.
really we just think small, like what is the basis, like just the basic form of this dream? If it's making a difference with the unhoused population in your community, what would be something that you can do in the next 1 to 2 weeks that would contribute towards impact? We're not even thinking about making some big nonprofit. It's just what can I do in the next week or two to make impact and try that. Because from there, I always talk about with clients making impact or building something is really it really is it's a step-by-step process, but like step like stairs. Each step that you do gives you a vantage point to know better what the next step is. So
Yeah.
you just need a step that's just above what you're doing right now, and then the next step is going to become a lot clearer from there.
I love that visual of the steps. Yeah. I was recently taking a course called Positive Intelligence, which is a really neat course. And the instructor was talking about, how do we get out of judgment, about what we are doing, what we're not doing, what others are doing, what they're not doing, and, the state of the world. And he's had a sort of similar thing to what you're saying is sometimes, and this is a little different because we're talking about answering callings, but, what he was saying is that sometimes we don't even have to go that big, especially initially. So if there's an issue like immigration that is feeling really place where you feel like something needs to be done different than what's happening. If you think about it from that perspective, it's huge.
Yeah.
He's like, or you can just go to the local restaurant run by an immigrant family and support their business. And then from that step, then you figure out is what's the view up to the next step, if there is something. He didn't use the step visualization. I love that you've brought that in, but it was the idea that there are smaller actions that we can take.
Yes. Yeah. Everything starts small. That's the reality. Everything starts small. And we only gain clarity when we take action steps and we keep going up to the next one, up to the next one. I
Yeah.
loved a coach once, Erin Foley, in a course I was taking. She was saying, for example, even just in building a business, it's too hard for your brain to wrap itself around 8 steps ahead. So if you're building a business like a client-based business, it's sometimes you could get scared off because your brain understandably doesn't believe that you can have, 20 clients because you haven't gotten one. So what it's really about is convincing your brain one step at a time. Like, I can get one client. Okay, great. From this step, can I get 2 clients? Okay, I can. Okay, now from this step, can I get a steady stream of clients? Okay, great. Now can I get a steady stream that's supporting me? And it really has to be that step. And you can apply that to any kind of impact or any kind of thing,
Yeah.
new thing.
Yeah. I love that. A lot of what we've been talking about so far is really applicable to us as adults, right? I'm imagining that there aren't too many children listening to this podcast, at least not of their own free will. Parenting podcasts are probably not their jam. But I do want to bring it back to that parenting piece because, you're a mom, I'm a mom, and this does feel like a time of major turmoil with lots of different things that have us upset that we feel like we want to get involved in. Obviously, we cannot do all of them.
Yeah.
But what I'm also seeing and hearing is that there are kids who see what's going on
Mhm.
and are like, this is my future that you all are messing with, right? This is my country that like my generation's going to inhabit when you all are long dead and gone.
Yeah.
And they want to be involved. They want to take action. How can we as parents take everything that you and I have been talking about today and introduce those concepts to our children,
Hmm.
teach them to our children, and invite them into the process of following their own callings when they come up? I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure on kids to have a passion, like something that you can show colleges that you care about. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about the kid is the kid who says, something's not right over here.
Yeah.
How do we invite them, teach them, guide them through
Hmm.
the process that you've been talking about that, we all as adults can use?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. Actually, I want to take even a step back. The step before that, I want to recommend a book by Britt Hawthorne. I'm forgetting the title. I think it's Anti-Racist Parenting, but I know she teaches in that book, teaching this lens for kids of learning, of picking up like, oh, that sidewalk is not accessible to everybody. Like, why do you think that is? What's going on? Or who's not in this room right now? Who do you notice is not in this room? So teaching that lens. But kids have such an innate sense of injustice. That's what I loved about teaching was that we're born so, most people are born with this sense of compassion for others and a sense of justice and wanting things to be right and fair. And and so as parents, I think it's our job to help kids find a productive route for that sense of injustice. So if your son, daughter, kid is noticing that, I remember when I was teaching, I was a sixth, seventh, and eighth grade writing teacher. And so we
Oh,
made everything about changing the world. That's what I angled the curriculum towards. Like, we are here to change the world. And so much of that is from, I realize I'm going in a few tangents, but I'm going to tie them back together. I remember
great.
since I was a kid, when I was a kid, I vividly remember my mom telling me that I should call the newspaper about something because newspapers listen more to kids than they do to adults. And people listen more to kids than they do to adults. And I still think that that's true today. And so when I was teaching, I try to teach that to kids like, your voice is so much louder than mine. If you use it, it will be heard. And so when I was a teacher, I was helping kids use their voice to write about injustices they saw in the world. How do we speak up about this? Who do we talk to about it? So as a parent, okay, we're upset about, whatever it is your kid is noticing. Maybe they're noticing that the bike lanes are not safe enough for people, or they're noticing that, there's tons of plastic being used in the store or whatever. First of all, who do we talk to about this? How do we do it in a way that's respectful, but so that our voice is heard? And what is the form that we do it? Do we talk to them? Do we put it in writing? How do we put that together? And I think that is a way for parents, that is the role as parents, is helping our kids speak up in a way that they feel heard and also in a way that they are heard. Because I think ultimately, psychologically, all of us need to be taking action. This isn't just like a should. Like, we should just be
Mm.
taking action because it's the right thing to do. I think kids know and adults can feel it. We need to be taking action so we stay sane. This is basic psychological need. And so as parents, we can be helping our kids learn the routes that we can be speaking up. First, teaching them the lenses of noticing things that are off, even though
Hmm.
kids can notice it all on their own, and then giving them those tools so that they can use their voice in a way that they are heard and they make a difference and they can see that process and take that with them into adulthood. When they're an
Yeah.
adult and they see an injustice, they can do something then too.
I love that you said that this taking action isn't just a should. It's like, it's a deep psychological need that we need to meet,
Yeah,
not to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, but because we have a desire to engage in the world. It actually, in positive discipline, we talk about the need that every human has for a sense of belonging and significance. And I think this need to take action fuels both of those, but certainly the sense of significance, right? The idea that we can impact our
100%.
world.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And kids so often feel disenfranchised in that by our actions, not because of them, but because we tend to say, oh, that's for the grown-ups to worry about,
Yeah,
right? That's for the grown-ups.
right.
And when we can engage them, not only might they change the world, but it feels that sense of significance that they so desperately need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just a little example, my son I think it was last year. So he was 4. There was this train thing during the holidays that he wanted to go to. He was upset they weren't opening earlier. And so that was just like a small micro example where I was like, okay, you're upset. They wish that they opened earlier. Let's write them a letter and ask them if they might consider opening a little earlier. It wasn't really an injustice, but at least it's teaching this act. Like you're frustrated about something, you can try to do something about it and release that tension you're feeling in your body in a healthy way.
Oh my gosh, what a cool example of empowering a child.
Yeah.
Say, hey, this is, you're right. Like it's not an injustice, but it's a
Yeah.
place that children can so easily learn to take action and use their voice
Right.
respectfully. And yeah, so,
Yeah, yeah. And
so
that was
cool.
my reasoning behind it was to teach that. But then afterward, I felt a little bad because he's like handing them a letter, and I think they thought he was going to be like, "Thank you so much," and he did thank them. But he's also like, "Can you open earlier?" I was like, okay, well, maybe we'll keep working on it.
Well, and the only reason that would be upsetting is because some adults are not that used to listening to children.
Yeah,
And we could perhaps all get a little better at that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Jeanne, we could continue this conversation for so long because there's just so much richness here, especially, as we said at the beginning, in light of the state of the world right now. So many places that we are all eager to figure out how to take action, but so many of us get stalled out because we don't know what to do with those callings. But in the interest of time, we'll end here, but I would love for you to share with listeners where they can find the beautiful work that you do with Sirens Rising.
yeah, yeah. Thanks. So my website is sirensrising.co. And then I run a siren circle every month for free. And it's just a gathering for folks that care about making social and climate impact and are maybe curious about doing it in their work or already doing it in their work. And that's a way to nourish what they're already doing. Everything can be found on my website, sirensrising.co.
Okay. And
Yeah.
we will make sure all of that is in the show notes as well so people can find it. I do want to just call out that Siren Circle because it's free. It's on the
Yeah.
fourth Tuesday of every month at 12:30 Central Standard Time. And what an incredible way for people to just even, as you said, like that's that analogy or the visual of the stairs,
Yeah.
right? Maybe showing up for that session, one of those sessions is the first step of the staircase to just say, hey, what do I need to know? What could I learn here?
Yeah.
And what an amazing gift that you're giving in making that free to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I mean, ultimately, it's all about this work and something I just wanted to add to that and something we really focus on in the Siren Circle too is that when things feel overwhelming and it feels maybe even helpless sometimes, I think something that's so helpful for me to remember is that not only am I the only person who cares about working towards change, there are so many people around the planet working towards change. And beyond that, non-human creatures, alive beings that are working towards change. I'm fortunate to live in the middle of the woods where there's lots of birds and there's lots of plants, and it's amazing to just see like trees want to survive, trees want to heal the planet, and people before us, past people and future people are all working towards change. And so to remember to just tap into that energy of that there's this larger force all pushing for
Yeah.
change and progress and good, and we're not alone.
Which we all need to remember so deeply right now
Yeah.
because it can feel overwhelming and really lonely right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeanne, thank you so much for this conversation. And bigger than that, thank you for the work that you're doing in the world and for listening to that calling, because I'm a believer that you listening to that calling will have ripple effects for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for all of your work you're doing and that you followed yours that led us to having this conversation today and all the
Yeah.
work that you're doing. Thanks,
Oh,
Christy.
thank you. All right. I hope you all loved that episode and took away something with it or from it, both in your own lives and in the way that you're guiding your children to take action. Such a rich conversation that we could have, gone on for quite a bit longer. The work that Jeanne is doing in the world, I think, is just so fascinating. and invites us all into better versions of ourselves. And I love that she frames this as not just things we should be doing, but things that are like, it's a psychological need for us to feel empowered, right? To feel like we can take action in the spaces that we care about. And that when we step into that, it serves us as well as the world around us. So I posed a question in the middle of the episode, and now I want to pose another one. So the first question was, have you experienced a transition in your passions, in your focus, in your callings when you went from being an adult with no kids to being a parent? I'd love for you to email me about those transition stories. Like I said, maybe we'll do another podcast episode about those. And then my second question for you that you can also email me about is, what is your calling? What callings have you received? How are you taking action? Or after listening to Jeanne, how might you choose to take action moving forward in small ways and in big? Would love to hear your stories. We are all part of a tapestry, and I love to hear how the other threads are woven in. So send me an email, and while you're on your computer, pop into wherever you listen to podcasts and drop a 5-star review of the Heartful Parent Podcast. It really does help this podcast get visibility and help other people find it. And that's what helps the podcast grow and allows me to bring you more and incredible conversations, thoughts, etc. So drop me an email, drop me a review, 5 stars, of course, and join me again next time for another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.